Well, good afternoon to you again, Naledi, and welcome back here at the Cape Town City Hall. This is where the Finance Minister will be delivering the budget speech this afternoon. Of course, the elephant in the room is going to be how government is going to be taking on some of the debt of this power utility. The implications of that, we don't know as yet. I'm going to bring in Steve Swart, the Chief Whip of the ACDP. Government making plans and, saying that they want to take on the portion of Eskom's debt. The implications for that, what's it going to be?
Well, it will definitely help Eskom to a certain degree because some of their debt, we expect it to be about 200 billion rand. There's already a Eskom debt relief bill that's going to be published today. But that then goes onto the government debt finances, and that obviously then has to also be serviced as an incredible increased debt, and that is a deep concern to us. But hopefully then it will place Eskom in a more positive position. Obviously, we are looking forward to what the Minister of Finance has to say about addressing and removing this load shedding. And so part of that is to alleviate the debt of Eskom, but secondly, he needs to give additional funding for diesel. We know that Eskom is not able to run the additional capacity because of a lack of diesel. If we don't have that, and if we don't reduce the levels of load shedding, we are going to have significantly decrease in our economic growth, which has then run on events with revenue that is not going to be collected, and of course then government has less money to spend. Now in that regard, we really hope from the ACDP side that we will see an increase in our pension levels and our social grants levels, because our people on the ground are really struggling. And it depends, of course, on economic growth and revenue that is collected. So there's a lot of challenges today for the Minister. He's going to have to really perform a balancing act about addressing public debt levels, debt service costs, as well as spending a little bit more on social grants, on alleviating poverty. And lastly, as a long-standing member of the Finance and Justice Committees, I always say, give more money to crime prevention. Give more money to the Hawks, the National Prosecuting Authority, and the Investigating Directorate that can collect billions of rands, and that can help balance the budget. So we really trust that the Minister will give a message of hope today to alleviate the suffering that our people are under severe financial constraints.
Talking about hope, I mean, you always over the years have been worried about the country reaching the fiscal cliff. Are you still concerned about that?
No, absolutely. We are still, our government debt levels are still very high. The debt service costs are very high. It's estimated that this year our debt to GDP will be 70%. And yes, that is slightly better than that was previously forecast, but it is still at unsustained levels. And so your debt service cost, which is about 350 million per year, is going to increase substantially. And I think that is a massive concern for us from the ACDP side, and we need to be able to spend more funds in that regard. In fact, it's billions. We're talking about billions of rands that are being spent, 350 billion to service our debt levels. And that then crowds out money that should be spent on your health, on education, on crime prevention and other much needed spaces. So we've got to reduce our fiscal debt, and that is the fiscal consolidation path. And then of course the government is criticized when they're doing that. They say no, we must spend more. So it's that balance that's got to be struck to reduce our government debt levels. The figures are astonishing. I mean, we're talking about a debt of increase of more than 4 trillion rand. That is 4,000 billion. That's why your debt service costs of 350 billion are a significant portion of that. And at one stage we had a balanced budget. Just think if those funds that are just to pay interest on debt could be used for other expenditure. So we're really hoping that we can be, from our perspective, good stewards of finances, servant leaders, and that we stop stealing money that should go to alleviate the poorest of our poor, stimulate economic growth so that we can collect more revenue so that we can address the plight of our people.
In your prediction, this announcement of the state of national disaster, do you think in order to fund it, it's going to be an appropriation, or is it going to be a reprioritization from other government departments?
Sorry to interrupt. I really hope it will be a reprioritization of budgets that are allocated elsewhere, because as we know, the finances are desperately constrained. We do not, from the ACDP side, support that national state of disaster for electricity. It's not necessary. And the other challenge is that Parliament then has no oversight of it. And we saw that with the COVID-19 lockdown, with ridiculous regulations being passed, with Parliament having no say over those regulations or how long the state of disaster was going to last. So by doing that, you're basically excluding Parliament's oversight to a large degree. And now the government wants to appoint a new Minister of Electricity, which we also say is not necessary. You've got a Minister of Public Enterprises, you've got a Minister of Energy, and you've got the Minister of Culture, 3 other ministers. So what is the new Minister of Electricity going to do? Are we then going to have, as many commentators have said, a Minister of Potholes, a Minister of Latrines? Surely those ministers that are given that portfolio should do the work and address the issues at Eskom. But we trust for a positive message from the minister. He's got a very difficult job today. He's got very little fiscal space to move. There is a tax windfall that we are expecting due to commodity exports. They said in October it will be about 80 billion. We think it's going to be less due to load shedding, but at least there's a little bit of room to move. And that's, say, 70 billion rand extra tax that's collected must go to help the poorest of the poor and to address our government debt levels.
All right, thank you so much, Steve Swart from the ACDP, giving us his party's view on this afternoon's budget speech. Into this conversation now, I'm going to bring in Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi from the IFP. If you were the finance minister, what would you focus on in the budget speech?
First and foremost, I wouldn't actually present a budget that is pinned on hopes and dreams, because we have heard so much of hope as if we're in the church, we're not there. So I was going to focus on a budget that speak to the needs and the challenges that our poor people are facing on the ground. Issues like making sure that we solve the issue of power shortages, and also make sure that we give a budget that will fight crime decisively, because today people are killed in public places, meaning that criminals have zero fear of the law. A budget that will make sure that, as the IFP propose, that a new conditional grant is introduced, which will be a local economic development grant, because municipalities actually have LED offices, but those offices do not have funding. So if government can concentrate some money to make sure that people at the local level are able to access funding to start their own businesses, to help SMMEs, and also make sure that we invest in agriculture.
The issue of government taking over a portion of Eskom's debt, as the IFP, do you support that?
Of course, we support that, because as currently we know that Eskom cannot survive. So if government takes a portion of that debt, it will actually help Eskom to be able to focus their money elsewhere. But we understand that if government takes over that debt, that will mean then more money would be required from the taxpayers to actually finance it, because it doesn't mean that the debt will simply go away. It means that government taking over. You know that Eskom itself is an entity of the state, so this debt is still there, it's just that's been removed from Eskom to the state, and we'll be able to pay for that.
What advice would you give the finance minister in terms of bringing relief to struggling South Africans?
I will say that minister should actually continue with the grants that are helping the 350, if possible that they can be increased. But we say the IFP, that should not be a permanent thing. It should be an interim thing while government trying to put himself in order, because people must get to work. Our people are not lazy to work. So the issue of prolonged grants, yet we as a country not have so much to collect, is not sustainable at all. So we're saying that more emphasis should be put on job opportunities, on putting infrastructure in place that will encourage investments, and also deal with all leakages that are in the system in the form of corruption and the likes.
All right, thank you so much, Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi from the IFP. Now, we're going to leave it at that for now, and we will talk to you in a moment. We'll cross back to you in Johannesburg.